Dr. Kosterlitz, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled to have you here. So, a Scottish physicist born into an immigrant family who fled anti-Semitism in Europe, with a prominent biochemist and lecturer for a father, I can imagine that from a very early age you were encouraged to find your passion for science. It was your parents who realized your academic potential and encouraged you to pursue a career in science, and you were encouraged to go to Cambridge, and then you received your PhD from Oxford University. So I think it's safe to say that you have been studying, working, researching in some of the top universities around the world: Cornell, Brown, and of course, Birmingham University, where you started as a research fellow at the Department of Mathematical Physics, and you met David Thouless, a paramount encounter, which would lead to your joint work on topological phase transitions of matter, and then your Nobel Prize in 2016. You're a man of so many interests. You dabbled in chemistry and are an incredible timer. How those other interests have shaped your work and your view of physics and science?
Physics was basically my main love for two reasons. I found chemistry interesting, but there were too many details to remember, and I have a terrible memory. And physics was a subject where it suited me because I didn't need to remember an awful lot, because it's all, you can deduce basically everything from a few facts. I like to say that I can remember a maximum of 10 facts, but I'm not too sure about 4 of them. So I have to make do with 6. Fortunately, physics suited my way of operating. I got, when I was at Cambridge, I took up rock climbing, and I found that I really liked it. I basically split my life in 2. Half of it was physics, and the other half was the mountains.
Yes, that seems like a good balance.
Yes.
It seems that some of the most important steps in your career and your life have been up to chance. You even ended up taking the position at the University of Birmingham because you didn't send all of the paperwork to start working at CERN.
Right, yeah.
So,
I like to say that my career has been more of a random walk through physics, where it's been just one lucky accident after another.
It sure seems really interesting. Would you say that succeeding in science is down to luck as much as it is to hard work?
Oh yes, because it doesn't really matter how smart one is and how hardworking one is, because one essential thing is to stumble across the right problem. But that's not easy, and it requires, to stumble on the right problem involves a lot of luck. And, you've got to be in the right place at the right time with the right people and do the right problem. So earlier on in my career, I was just stumbling from one thing to another, wondering that if I was going to survive in physics or what was going to happen to me. And then, as you pointed out, I failed to get into CERN by not submitting my paperwork in time, and then ended up in Birmingham University. I needed a job, had to go somewhere. So found one of the few places that had offering, had a position open, was in Birmingham. So I took it. I needed the job, and because Birmingham was the last place I wanted to go to, but it was a big and dirty industrial city in the flat middle of England, no mountains in sight. So it was the last place I wanted to be, but I hadn't much choice. And I met David Thowles there, and then I guess you could say the rest is history.
Really convenient coincidence. I bet that it is also down to the people you meet. And we sometimes imagine scientists, and especially physicists, as loners whose ideas come from a pure genius moment, working in their lab by themselves. But that's certainly not the case for you. How was your first encounter with David Thowles and Duncan Haldane, and how did you ended up working with them?
Well, I never actually worked with Duncan Haldane. Thowles, when I went to Birmingham, I was a high energy physicist. I spent the first year or so continuing doing the long, tedious calculations for zero return. And then I was just about to write up my calculations for publication when the preprint arrived on my desk doing exactly what I was trying to do. So I thought, well, okay, these things happen. Then I started on the next problem. We're just about to write it up for publication when exactly the same thing happened. And so I sort of threw my hands up in the air and said, I can't compete. I'm stuck in this little office in Birmingham on my own. And there's this group of 4 or 5 people in Berkeley in California who are doing exactly what I'm doing. And I can't compete, with this group. So I walked around the department asking everybody I could find. I said, do you by any chance have a problem that maybe I could look at? And in general, the answer was no, until I got to David Thowles' office, rather nervously knocked on his door and went in, and he started talking about things that I had really understood nothing. And fortunately, he was writing on the board and I was standing there completely lost. And then in desperation, I said, excuse me, I have to stop you there because I'm completely lost. Could you please explain, where did the first equation you wrote, where did that come from? He turned around, looked at me and said, didn't I tell you that? And I could honestly say, no, you didn't. At which point he said, oh, and then proceeded to give a very clear explanation. And from that point on, I decided, okay, this is a good idea. If I talk to this man in the future, clearly Thowles was some sort of genius who was operating on a different level to me and most other people. Then I decided that if I didn't understand him something in the future, which was going to be certainly frequent, I would assume he did the same thing. He didn't explain something important. And that gave me the confidence to be able to ask him the stupid questions. And so fortunately, he seemed to quite, appreciate the questions I was asking. And so we got on very well together. And the rest is history. My colleagues in the department were all terrified of Thowles because Thowles never deliberately tried to put people down, but he would always point out in a very quiet way, when they started talking nonsense, he would immediately point out where they were going wrong and what they should have said. And since this happened to everybody more than once, everybody else is terrified of him because, he was just too smart. He's so much, his mind seemed to work on a different level. And so talking to this person was not easy, since inevitably, you would say something that was wrong, and he'd immediately explain where you go wrong and what you should have done, and make you feel like an idiot. But you see, since the first meeting I had with him, he made this mistake by not explaining, the starting point or something. I just assumed that when I didn't understand him, he'd done the same thing, and he'd omitted something important. And it wasn't my lack of understanding, it was his lack of not, omitting. It was his omission of something very important. And so I lost my fear of him. And so we got on well together after that.
That sounds like the way you tackled a problem was so different, but then you could actually work together because of it.
Well, yes, because Thouless would look at a problem in a very strange way. It was completely off the usual way of approaching these problems. And of course, I came from high energy physics. I didn't know any condensed matter physics at all. And so his way of looking at a problem to me wasn't strange at all, because his way of looking at things worked. And so obviously his way was right. And so I sort of learned how to look at problems in strange ways. And so far, it's worked out.
You're talking about trying to explain a problem and trying to make it understandable to other people. And I was wondering, how would you do that with your whole work, especially to children, because Maloka is centered around children around 7 to 12 years?
Well,
a very difficult question.
Well, no, it's not so hard, because it's really quite simple, because we started from really a very simple problem, which was easy to understand what the problem was. It's just that solution was very difficult. And so eventually we managed to solve this very simple problem. And then this simple problem turned out to be applicable to, some real problems. And so we could use the idea, even the ideas from this silly little test problem to solve some real problems. And so that, in my opinion, is the way you do things, because any problem in the real world has got all sorts of complications. It's very, very complicated, with all sorts of things going on. And one of the difficult things is to reduce this very complicated problem down to something simple, which one can actually think about. And so, David and I made the guess that our complicated problem could be reduced to this much simpler situation, which we could solve. And to our great pleasure, it actually worked. And so then we could argue that all the stuff we ignored, just didn't matter for the the behavior of the system, and we were very lucky. Right, when I'm talking to a student or a school boy or whatever, school child about science, I always say, okay, just look out of the window, and you see lots of unexplained things, and I ask them, how would you explain, for instance, that tree? Why does it have the structure it has? Why is it doing what it's doing? Birds flying. How do they fly? Why don't they just fall out of the air? And so on and so forth. Just look around out of the windows. Lots of interesting things happening. The thing that drives me, and I think a lot of other scientists, is trying to answer these silly sort of questions, because a lot of these questions are actually quite deep. I always like to say, you get this child who comes and asks some naive question. Actually, some of the questions young kids ask you are actually very deep.
It must have been so exhilarating receiving the news that you won the Nobel Prize. What was your first thought when you were told?
Well, that was quite interesting, because you see, Alice and I had done the work way back in 1973, 74, and we're now talking about 2016, so it's a long time. And David and I knew the piece of work we'd done was good, but it really, okay, for the first 5, 6, 7 years after we did it, we didn't get a single citation. So we thought, okay, it was a nice piece of work, but the rest of the world isn't interested in it. So we did other things, and then it started to get a bit more popular. And then around the 1978, 77, 78, a crucial experiment was done in Cornell, where they, looking at a system which our theory should describe quite accurately, and their results agreed completely with our predictions. And so we were incredibly pleased about that, because that really, was the crucial experiment. It was a real smoke, because what we had was what you would call a smoking gun prediction, because our theory predicted that this physical quantity, which was measurable, was an actual number which we'd calculate. And so there was no way that our theory could change this number. So in other words, that when this quantity was measured, if the measurement was different from our predicted number, that would mean that our theory is wrong. One of the questions that people are constantly asking, I would say, very proud of this theory, because look, it has this prediction which is inescapable, and look, the experiment says you're correct, and therefore the theory is right. And then, of course, the question is, well, what can you apply this theory to? What applications does it have? And trouble was that the answer is actually none. You see, because the theory, was most directly applicable to the properties of a thin film of superfluid helium, a few atomic layers thick, and this is not exactly a system with many uses, applications beyond just the fact that it exists and our theory described it, but that was the only application there was. But a few years later, other people pointed out that it's got it's applicable to superconductors, and then came these quantum systems, these topological insulators, and our theory could actually be applied to some of these topological insulators. And so because of the importance of topological insulators, then that's why we got the Nobel Prize. I am now I'm getting on in years, and with the Nobel Prize and stuff, I'm now in a position where I don't need a grant anymore. I don't have to do work which the funding agencies want me to do, because I feel like I can do what I want to do, and I will think about problems that interest me, and never mind the rest of the world. They can do what they want, but I'm going to do what I want.
Actually, most of the questions we had, we gathered them through social media. Our audience sent them, and we had just to finish this interview, we had a pretty funny one. If you had to choose between winning the Nobel Prize and creating the climb in Val d'Orco, which bears your name, which one would it be?
I'm not sure, to tell the honest truth, because now in my old age I can't climb anymore. So I got sick and had to stop climbing. But earlier on, I think that I would have chosen to do to do the mountaineering rather than the physics, because as I said, climbing was half my life, and I was quite good at it. Certainly lots of people were much better than me, but in my younger days I could, if I tried hard, I could compete with the best climbers around. And so, both aspects of life were very important to me.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
It was a
been
pleasure.
Delightful.
Bye now. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.